Ezra Fontaine did not expect to leave that hotel ballroom with a broken nose, a bruised ego, and a woman's handprint burning across his face. But that was exactly what happened, and every single person in that room watched it unfold. He had walked into the Grand Calloway Hotel that Tuesday evening expecting to collect. Not money, not information. Compliance. The kind of quiet, suffocating compliance that a man like Ezra Fontaine had spent 20 years building into the bones of this city. He ran the Fontaine Syndicate out of New Orleans the way other men ran Fortune 500 companies, strategically, ruthlessly, and with an absolute intolerance for disruption. The disruption that evening came in the form of a 26-year-old banquet server named Blythe Oram. She was a big woman, not the kind of big that people politely ignored or coded into euphemism. She was genuinely, unapologetically large, 260 pounds of wide hips, thick arms, and a jaw set so firmly it looked like she'd been carved out of something harder than ordinary flesh. She wore the hotel's standard-issue black server uniform, the fabric pulled tight across her heavy shoulders, her dark hair pinned back in a no-nonsense knot. She had been working the Fontaine family's private reception for 3 hours without incident, moving between tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned very early in life that invisibility was a survival skill. Then Ezra's associate, a wire-thin man named Aldous Reeve, put his hand on her tray and tipped it deliberately. He didn't do it by accident. Blythe knew the difference. She had been a server long enough to recognize a man testing a woman's limits. The casual cruelty of someone who understood that she couldn't afford to react, couldn't afford to escalate, because her rent was due in 6 days, and she needed this shift. 12 champagne flutes hit the marble floor. The sound shattered through the ballroom. Heads turned. Aldous looked at the broken glass, and then looked at Blythe with the particular smile of a man who had never once faced a consequence in his life. "Clean it up, sweetheart. And maybe next time, watch where you're going." Blythe set her empty tray down on the nearest table, very slowly, very deliberately. She had told herself, once, that she would stop letting men like this pass through her life without friction. She had told herself that on the night her previous employer's business partner had grabbed her wrist and told her she ought to be grateful for the work, given how she looked. She had told herself that at 21 and at 23, and again, just 8 months ago, when a customer at the diner where she'd worked before this had left her a receipt with "lose some weight" written where the tip should have been. She had told herself she just hadn't done it yet, until now. Blythe picked up a single unbroken champagne flute from the table beside her. She turned to face Aldous Reeve, who was already turning away, already dismissing her the way men like him dismissed everything, by simply ceasing to look. "You did that on purpose?" she said, her voice carrying clean and flat across the ballroom. Aldous turned back slowly, eyebrows lifting in theatrical disbelief, performing his amusement for the room. "Excuse me, you heard me." There was a pause. A particular kind of hush that falls over a crowd when something unexpected is about to happen, and everyone in the room can feel it before it begins. Aldous took a step toward her. He was smiling, but the smile had edges on it. "Do you know whose party this is, honey?" "I know exactly whose party this is," Blythe said, "and I know that whoever he is, he didn't invite you here to harass his catering staff." Aldous stopped smiling. He reached out and flicked the champagne flute from Blythe's hand. A sharp, contemptuous gesture, and it shattered on the marble. "You should leave before you make this worse for yourself." Blythe looked at the broken glass on the floor. She looked at Aldous. She looked at the room full of expensive suits and jeweled necklaces, all watching with the politely horrified fascination of people who believed themselves too refined for the scene they were witnessing. Then she looked directly at Ezra Fontaine, who was standing 20 feet away with a whiskey in his hand, watching her with dark, unreadable eyes. She said, loudly enough for him to hear, "Control your people, Mr. Fontaine, or I'll do it for you." Ezra's expression did not change. The room held its breath. Aldous moved toward her with the confident stride of a man who had never once encountered pushback that mattered. He grabbed her arm above the elbow, his fingers dug in. Blythe broke his nose with the heel of her palm. It was not a hysterical swing. It was not wild or panicked. It was a short, compact, devastatingly accurate strike. The kind a woman develops after years of watching self-defense videos at 2 in the morning because she walks to her car alone after every late shift, and she is not willing to be a statistic. Aldous went backward into a table. Crystal glasses cascaded, a flower arrangement toppled. 3 very expensive bottles of Bordeaux rolled off the tablecloth and shattered against the floor. Aldous sat in the wreckage, his face a mask of shock and blood, staring up at Blythe with his mouth working soundlessly. Blythe reached into the pocket of her server's apron and pulled out the small notepad she used for orders. She tore off a blank page, placed it on Aldous's chest, and said calmly, "That's my contact information. Have your employer send the dry cleaning bill to that address. I'll expect a receipt." Then she unpinned her name tag, set it on the nearest table, and walked out of the Grand Callaway ballroom. She made it 3 blocks before Ezra Fontaine's black car pulled up alongside her. She didn't run. Running was for people who hadn't already accepted that things were about to get considerably worse. The rear window rolled down. Ezra Fontaine looked at her from the back seat with the same expression he'd worn in the ballroom. Measuring, unreadable, the face of a man who had been calculating odds his entire life and was currently calculating hers. "Get in," he said. "I'm not getting in a strange man's car at 10 o'clock at night. I'm not a strange man. You just broke my associate's nose in front of 40 witnesses." He grabbed me first. Blythe kept walking. "And he's not your associate. He's your liability." There were cameras in that ballroom. There was a pause. The car matched her pace. "You're not afraid of me," Ezra said. It wasn't a question. There was something in his tone she couldn't quite name. Not admiration, not yet, but something adjacent to it. "I'm very afraid of you," Blythe said honestly. "But being afraid of something and letting it stop you are 2 different choices. I've been making the second choice my whole life, and I'm tired of it." The car stopped. Blythe stopped. She turned and looked at the open window, at the man inside it, who was looking back at her with an expression that had shifted into something she recognized even less than the first one. "My name is Blythe Oram," she said. "I've worked 3 jobs simultaneously for the last 4 years. I owe $11,000 in medical debt from a surgery I needed 2 years ago that my employer's insurance didn't cover. I have never in my life asked anyone for anything I didn't earn." She held his gaze. "Whatever you're going to do to me for what happened in there, I'd appreciate if you just said it directly." Ezra Fontaine was quiet for a long moment. "Get in the car, Blythe," he said. "I want to talk." She got in the car. The conversation lasted 4 hours. Not in the car. They ended up in a private booth at a restaurant that had no menu posted outside and no sign above the door. The kind of place that existed in this city specifically for men like Ezra, and the conversations they needed to have without anyone listening. Blythe sat across from him and ate a steak she could never have afforded and answered his questions with the same flat, unflinching directness she'd used in the ballroom. He asked about her work history. She told him 4 years of service industry jobs, 2 years before that in a clerical position at an insurance firm that had laid off its entire support staff the week before Christmas without severance. Before that, she had put herself through a community college certification program in hotel management while supporting her mother, who had a degenerative knee condition and couldn't work more than part-time. Ezra listened to all of it without interrupting, which Blythe found unusual. Men in expensive suits, in her experience, listened to her the way they looked at her, briefly, dismissively, waiting for her to finish so they could return to what actually interested them. Ezra Fontaine did not look at her that way. "Why hotel management?" he asked. "I like systems," Blythe said. I like understanding how a building full of people functions. Who's responsible for what? Where the breakdowns happen? How to fix them? Do you know how my organization functions? She looked at him steadily. I know what you are, Mr. Fontaine. I know what the Fontaine name means in this city. I did the research when I got the booking for tonight's event. And you took the shift anyway. The shift paid $40 an hour. My rent is due in 6 days. Something that might have been respect moved through his expression and disappeared before she could be sure she'd seen it. Aldous Reeve, Ezra said, has been with my organization for 11 years. He has never in that time been physically challenged by anyone, because no one has ever felt positioned to do it. A pause. You felt positioned. He put his hands on me, Blythe said simply. I don't care whose name is on the door. Nobody puts their hands on me. Ezra leaned back in his chair. He looked at her the way she imagined. He looked at buildings he was considering buying, taking in the structure, the load-bearing walls, calculating what it might be worth and what it would cost. I have a proposition, he said. I don't do that kind of work, Blythe said. I'm not propositioning you, he said, and the ghost of something that might have been amusement crossed his face. I'm offering you a job, a real one. I have 14 businesses operating in this city, all legitimate on paper. I need a director of operations for the Grand Callaway. I own it as of 3 months ago. The position has been empty because the 3 candidates I interviewed were either dishonest, incompetent, or both. He tilted his head slightly. You understand systems. You're not afraid of confrontation. And you clearly don't allow sentiment to affect your decisions under pressure. Blythe stared at him. You want to hire me. I want to hire you, he confirmed. I broke your associate's nose. He deserved it, Ezra said. I'll be dealing with that separately. He slid a card across the table. The number printed on it was her current annual income multiplied by 4. Think about it. You have 48 hours. Blythe looked at the card. She looked at the man across from her, who had built something terrifying and enormous and inexplicably, apparently, sat here in this unmarked restaurant, offering legitimate employment to a banquet server who had assaulted his personnel. She picked up the card. She thought about it for 11 hours. Then she called the number. The first month was a war. Not with Ezra. She barely saw him. The war was with the Grand Callaway itself, which had been running on the inertia of institutional dysfunction for so long that half its management staff had forgotten what a functioning operation actually looked like. Blythe walked into her first day to discover that the hotel's linen contract was costing 40% more than market rate because the previous director had signed an exclusivity deal with a vendor who, she later learned, had been providing kickbacks directly to that director's personal account. The kitchen was hemorrhaging prep staff because the head chef had cultivated a culture of deliberate humiliation that HR had documented and filed and done absolutely nothing about for 2 years. The event booking system was a patchwork of outdated software and handwritten logs that no one fully understood, which meant the hotel had double-booked 3 functions in the past 6 months and settled 2 of the resulting disputes quietly and expensively, terminated the linen contract on day 3, absorbing the penalty fee and replacing it with a new vendor at a rate that would recover the penalty cost within 4 months. She placed the head chef on immediate administrative suspension pending a formal HR review and promoted the sous chef, a 29-year-old woman named Therese, who had been quietly running the kitchen's actual operations for 18 months. While the head chef took credit, she hired a systems consultant to audit the booking software and spent 2 weeks working alongside them to rebuild the entire intake process from scratch. Ezra Fontaine sent her a single text message at the end of her 3rd week. My accountant says you've already recovered the linen penalty. Good work, she typed back. The kitchen situation is going to cost you more before it costs you less. The chef is threatening legal action. His response came in under 60 seconds. Let him. Forward everything to my attorneys. She did. The chef's legal action evaporated within 10 days. Blythe didn't ask how. The second month was quieter. Systems settled, staff turnover slowed. The event bookings, now managed through a platform that actually communicated with itself, began filling out for the next quarter in a way that made the revenue projections look, for the first time in 2 years, genuinely healthy. Ezra began appearing at the hotel, not conspicuously, not in a way she could point to and name. He would be in the lobby when she was crossing it, the way people sometimes are. He would be in the bar at the end of an evening when she was doing her walkthrough. He asked her questions about the renovations she'd proposed for the East Wing, about the staffing model she was piloting for event days, about the vendor renegotiations she had lined up for the coming quarter. They were good questions, the questions of someone who understood what they were asking. She answered them directly. He listened. It was, she realized, becoming a habit. One evening, a Thursday late November, the hotel quiet between bookings, she was in her office working through the East Wing renovation specs when her door opened without a knock. She looked up. It was not Ezra. It was a man she didn't recognize, compact, gray-haired, in a suit that was expensive in the way that meant old money rather than new. He came in and sat in the chair across from her desk as though he'd been expected. "You're Blythe Oram," he said. "This is a private office," she said. "You didn't knock. I don't generally knock." He smiled the way Aldous Reeve had smiled before she broke his nose, the smile of someone performing certainty for an audience of one. "My name is Croft Bellamy. I represent certain interests in this city that are not entirely compatible with Ezra Fontaine's continued success." He set a thick envelope on her desk. "That is a considerable sum of money. In exchange, I need certain information about the Fontaine operation's financial arrangements, specifically those funneled through this hotel." Blythe looked at the envelope. She looked at Croft Bellamy. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "I think you do," he said pleasantly, "and I think you're smart enough to recognize an opportunity." "What I recognize," Blythe said, "is a man who has badly misjudged who he's talking to." She stood up. She was taller than him and wider, and the desks between them was the only reason he wasn't backing toward the door already. "I'm a hotel operations director. That's all I am. And if you'd like to make an appointment to discuss any legitimate business the Grand Calloway can assist you with, I suggest you contact my assistant during regular business hours." Bellamy's pleasant expression cooled. "You should think carefully about." "I've thought," Blythe said. "Get out of my office." He left. She waited until she heard the elevator close. Then she picked up her phone. Ezra answered on the second ring. "Croft Bellamy just left my office," she said. "He offered me money for financial information about your operation through the hotel. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, and I sent him away. I'm telling you now because you need to know, and because I want it on record that I told you immediately and that my answer was no." There was a silence on the line. "Did he threaten you?" Ezra's voice was perfectly level. The levelness of it was not calm. She had been around him long enough now to know the difference. "Not explicitly," she said. The implication was present. "Another I'm 15 minutes away. I don't need you to." "I know you don't need me to," he said. "I'm coming anyway," she could have argued. She was very good at arguing. She said, "Okay." He arrived in 12 minutes, not 15. He came through the service entrance and up the back stair, which told her he had either memorized the hotel's layout more thoroughly than she'd realized, or he had always known it better than he'd let on. She met him in the corridor outside her office, and the thing she noticed first, before anything else, was that he looked at her the way you look at something you were briefly afraid might be damaged and have now confirmed is intact. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "It takes more than a man in a suit to rattle me. I know it does." He said it simply, without decoration. "That's the problem." She looked at him. "Excuse me." Ezra leaned against the corridor wall, his arms crossed, looking at her with that same steady, calculating attention that she had, over 2 months, come to understand was not coldness. It was concentration. He concentrated on things that mattered to him. She had started to understand, slowly, that she had become one of those things. And she had been deliberately not examining that understanding too closely because the conclusions it implied were inconvenient. "Bellamy isn't going to stop at one conversation," Ezra said. "He's been attempting to dismantle my operations in this city for 3 years. He's tried bribery, coercion, legal pressure, and 2 attempts at regulatory investigation that went nowhere because my attorneys are better than his." He paused. "He came to you because he assumed you were a weak point. Someone I'd hired without thinking through the exposure." "And," Blythe said. "And you're not," Ezra said. "Which I knew, which means now he knows it too, and that makes you a target rather than a lever." He looked at her steadily. "I need to move you, give you security. I don't want." "No," Blythe said. He stopped. "I took this job," she said, "because it was a real job that I was qualified for, and it paid what it paid, and I needed it. I did not take it to become someone's protected asset. I am not moving into a safe house or traveling with bodyguards, or any of the other things I can see you arranging in your head right now. Blythe, I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mother and my grandmother and my uncle, and we ate what we could afford, and I worked my first job at 14, and I have never," she said, her voice steady and clear and entirely without drama, "never in my life had anyone arrange things for me. I don't know how to be arranged for, and I'm not starting now, because a man in an expensive suit came to my office and implied things." Ezra looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight. The thing she had identified as concentration was present in his expression at a level she hadn't seen before. "You are," he said finally, "genuinely the most stubborn person I have ever met in my life. I've been called worse. I don't mean it as a criticism." He said it quietly. "I mean it as—" He stopped. He looked at the floor for a moment, which she had also learned was unusual. Ezra Fontaine did not look away from things. "I mean that I came here tonight because I was concerned about you. Specifically, not about the hotel or the information you might or might not have access to. About you, Blythe." He met her eyes. "And I would like to know how to do that without you interpreting it as someone trying to arrange your life." The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere below them, the hotel moved through its ordinary nighttime operations. Carts and elevators and the muffled percussion of a building doing its work. Blythe looked at Ezra Fontaine, who ran a criminal organization and owned 14 businesses and had walked into a hotel at 11 o'clock at night, because he was worried about her, specifically, and was apparently struggling, visibly, genuinely struggling, to express that in a way that didn't violate what he understood about who she was. She said, "I'm going to finish the renovation specs tonight. It'll take another 2 hours. You can stay if you want." He stayed. He sat in the chair across from her desk, the same chair Croft Bellamy had sat in 2 hours earlier, and he worked through things on his phone while she worked through the renovation specs, and neither of them said very much, and it was the most comfortable Blythe had felt in the presence of another person in longer than she could clearly remember. At 1:15 in the morning, she closed her laptop. He looked up. "Bellamy's going to come back," she said. "Yes, and when he does, I'm going to handle it the same way I handled tonight. I'm going to tell him no, and tell you immediately, and document everything, and I am not going to be a vulnerability in your organization, because I refuse to let him make me one." "I know," Ezra said. "But," she said, "if you want to tell me more about what he's actually after, the real structure of it, not the version you'd give a hotel director, I think I should know, so I understand what I'm standing in the middle of." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant ask. I know. If I tell you more, it becomes harder for you to claim ignorance." "I'm already past the point of ignorance," Blythe said. "I've been managing the financial channels through this hotel for 2 months. I'm not stupid. I know what the numbers look like. I know what some of them mean, she held his gaze. I'm not asking you to confess anything. I'm asking you to trust me with enough information to protect myself, without protection I didn't ask for. Ezra Fontaine looked at her for a very long time, he told her. Croft Bellamy came back 11 days later. He didn't come to her office this time. He came to the parking structure beneath the hotel at 7:45 in the morning, while she was crossing it on the way in from the street, because he had looked at her and concluded that being caught alone and on foot would loosen something in her that the office setting hadn't. He brought 2 men with him, large ones. The kind of large that was a statement. Blythe had her phone out before he finished his opening sentence. She pressed play on a recording, a clear, clean audio file that opened with Bellamy's own voice from 11 days ago, his name, his offer, his implication. She held the phone up so he could hear it. That went to 3 separate locations the night you left my office, she said, one of which is a journalist I went to community college with who covers organized crime for the Times-Picayune. She's sitting on it at my request. She'll stop sitting on it the moment I stop asking her to. Bellamy stared at her, his large men shifted. You're bluffing, he said. You built your whole plan around the assumption that I'm the kind of person who can be pressured, Blythe said. You looked at me and you saw someone desperate enough for a paycheck to be bought, or scared enough of the dark to be threatened. You did not do your research, Mr. Bellamy. She put her phone in her pocket. I grew up with nothing. Men like you have been trying to use that against me my entire life. You have nothing I want and nothing I fear. She stepped around him. Have a good morning. She felt his eyes on her back all the way to the elevator. She texted Ezra from inside it. Bellamy tried again. Parking structure, I handled it. Details when you're available. His response, I saw. I was in the lobby. She stared at her phone. Then you were watching. I was in the lobby. I don't surveil my employees, but you were there. A pause. I was there. She thought about what to say to that for a long moment. Then she typed, thank you for letting me handle it. His response took a few seconds longer than usual. Thank you for handling it. 3 weeks later, Croft Bellamy was arrested on federal charges that had nothing to do with Ezra Fontaine and everything to do with a financial paper trail that someone had quietly compiled and placed in the hands of the appropriate federal investigators. Blythe did not ask Ezra about the timing. He did not volunteer information about it. They understood each other well enough by then to know that some things were better left to the space between statements. The East Wing renovation broke ground on a Thursday in early December. Blythe stood in the gutted corridor in a hard hat and steel-toed boots, going over the schedule with the construction foreman, when she became aware that Ezra had arrived. She could tell by the way the crew subtly repositioned, the small kinetic adjustment that happened in any room when Ezra Fontaine entered it, the way people recalibrated their understanding of the space. He came and stood beside her. He looked at the bare walls, the exposed framing, the taped measurements on the subfloor. It's going to be good, he said. It's going to be great, she said. Give me 6 months. He looked at her then in his particular way, measuring and present, and no longer, she realized, calculating anything, just looking. Blythe, he said. I know, she said. I haven't said anything. She looked at the framing, the bones of a thing being rebuilt into something better than it had been. I've known for a while. I've been deciding what to do with it. And she turned to look at him. She was a big woman in a hard hat in the gutted shell of a hotel corridor, with plaster dust on her jacket and a schedule in her hand, and $11,000 of medical debt she'd paid off last month with her 3rd paycheck from this job. She had been nobody's anything for 26 years, by choice and by circumstance, and by the particular pride of a woman who had learned early that needing people was a liability and had built herself accordingly. She had also, somewhere in the last 4 months, stopped being entirely comfortable with that architecture. I'm not one of your operations, she said. I'm not a protected asset, and I'm not a liability, and I'm not a thing you acquire. If this is something, it's something between two people who are honest with each other. Those are the terms. Those have always been my preferred terms, Ezra said. I know, she said. That's the only reason we're having this conversation. She turned back to the construction schedule. After a moment, Ezra turned back to it too. They stood side by side in the dust and the half-light of a building in the process of becoming. And Blythe Oram felt for the first time in a very long time that the particular weight of standing alone in a world that had not been built with her in mind was slightly, structurally, significantly, less than it had been before. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary Tuesday. Inside the Grand Callaway, something was being rebuilt from the bones out, stronger, this time, and built to last by the only woman in the room who knew exactly how.